وبالفعل يسعدنا أن نستضيف على الهواء مباشرة من نيويورك السفيرة كارين بيرس المندوبة الدائمة لبريطانيا في الأمم المتحدة، وذلك في أول مقابلة لها منذ توليها مقاليد منصبها في 26 من مارس الماضي. مشاهدينا، كارين بيرس هي أول امرأة في تاريخ المملكة المتحدة تتولى منصب سفيرة بريطانيا للأمم المتحدة، وسبقها في هذا المنصب 18 رجلا كسفير لبريطانيا لدى هذه المنظمة الدولية. Karen Pierce, Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom to the UN, welcome to our screens.
Thank you very much, Talal. It's nice to be back.
It's our honor and pleasure to have you first sit-down interview since you took this post. Allow me first to convey my and my colleagues' congratulations on your new appointment to the United Nations as a permanent representative for the United Kingdom. And it's notable that you are the United Kingdom first female permanent rep to the United Nations. Now, what does it mean to you to be the first woman to break this glass ceiling? And why did it take so long for the United Kingdom to appoint a female permanent representative to this position?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a huge honour to represent your country at the UN, and I think to be the first woman diplomat for the United Kingdom is a double honour, and I am most grateful to Prime Minister Theresa May and Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson and of course Her Majesty the Queen for appointing me. I don't know why it took so long, to be absolutely frank. It's a pity that it did in one sense, but it's a great joy for me to be able to punch through the glass ceiling if one exists. And it's something we're trying to do as the British Foreign Office round the world, to put women diplomats into ambassadorships where they traditionally have not been.
Another leader who is pushing for advancement and empowerment of women in our area and in his country is Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdul Aziz, whom you met actually on the 29th of March, you and the other four permanent representative of the P5. Can you tell us something? I mean, I understand sometimes meetings you can't speak about the content, but can you tell us something about the content and your atmospherics and your impression?
Well, it was the first time I'd met His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, but he had a very successful visit to the UK just before coming to America, where the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary had a range of discussions with him. So it was extremely interesting to be able to pick up those issues with him. We in the UK are very strong admirers of what the Crown Prince is trying to achieve on Vision 2030. When he was in London, we were able to discuss with him ways in which the United Kingdom might support that. And there was a rather good poster campaign across London that showed Saudi Arabia and the UK under the banner United Kingdoms with an S on the end, which everybody liked, and I think made a very good point about the strategic relationship and the importance for Britain of its partnership with Saudi Arabia, which we value enormously. And the P5 continued the foreign policy dimension of the Crown Prince's visits. So we talked about Yemen, we talked about Syria, we talked about Iran.
Okay. I would like to move to Yemen, if I may. The United Kingdom, who is the pen holder for the Yemen file in the Security Council, has publicly said more than once that it supports Saudi Arabia's right to defend itself against the missiles attacks that it has been witnessing lately. There has been evidence provided to the Security Council by the Americans, by the Saudis, that connects these missiles to Iran and as smuggled weapons, among other weapons, to the Houthis in breach of 2216 resolution, which is under Chapter 7. What can the Security Council do to compel Iran to adhere to the embargo, the arms embargo, on sending missiles and arms to the rebels in Yemen?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say to Lal is that we send all our sympathies and condolences to the Saudi victims of such missile attacks. That is illegal under international law, and we support Saudi Arabia's right to defend itself. But the conflict in Yemen will not, in our view, be resolved without a lasting and an inclusive political process. We very much support the new UN envoy, Martin Griffiths, who is just beginning his work. His Royal Highness very kindly said that he would make sure that Martin Griffiths had good access within Riyadh and within the Saudi system, which I think will be very important. I know Martin is committed to trying to find a path forward so that we can get to this inclusive political process. I think the Security Council's role is to support the UN and Martin specifically. Where we can help on stopping missile shipments, for example, by authorising certain international measures, then we, the UK, with our American and French friends, will be working very hard in the Security Council for that. The Crown Prince was able to explain to the Russians and Chinese, who are perhaps not quite as forward as the UK, US and France, why this was very important for Saudi Arabia.
Talking about Martin Griffiths, why would you think that he is more likely to succeed when more other diplomats, experienced diplomats, astute diplomats, such the likes of Jamal bin Omar and Ismail Wali Sheikh Ahmed have not?
It's a very good question. Sometimes these things just go in cycles, unfortunately, and sometimes peace processes just need to go through an iterative stage in order for everybody to get into the mindset where now is the moment for peace. So I don't think it's that the earlier envoys failed. I think it's that they prepared the ground, which we hope Martin will now be able to build on. The fact that the Crown Prince and senior Saudi officials are meeting Martin and are ready to work with him is, I think, a very good sign. We obviously need a corresponding approach from the Houthi side and from all those who support the Houthis, such as Iran.
Why do you think also that Resolution 2216, which is under Chapter 7, was never implemented, and the Council, Security Council, never took any steps to force compliance by the Houthis?
It's very difficult, and it is one of the gaps in the international system to force compliance on entities that are not states. The UN, like a lot of the post-World War II international order, is built on a presumption, including a legal presumption, that international policy is always done state to state. And then when you get a case like the Houthis, I think that exposes what is admittedly a gap in the international system. So it's very difficult, and one has to rely on efforts like the UN's to talk to communities, on those people with good links to the Houthis to use their best officers to bring the Houthis to the negotiating table. As far as missile shipments goes, yes, the Security Council can impose sanctions. It can also, in principle, use force. It always prefers to try the sanctions route first. Iran is under sanctions. Those sanctions are reviewed regularly. We will keep them under very close review.
Okay. Talking about the resolutions and the possibility of implementing them, and when it's entities, not states, is difficult. But even when it's states, like 2401 on Syria, it's difficult to compel parties like Russia, like Iran, like Syrian government to implement. Doesn't that really erode the reputation and the credibility of the Security Council?
I don't myself think it erodes the Security Council's credibility. I think it's an inherent issue to do with trying to compel peace. It's a very difficult thing to do. By definition, the Security Council cannot authorise the use of force everywhere, but it is something that is inherent in the current state of the world and the large number of conflicts that we have going on in some key places. But it doesn't mean the Security Council is inactive. It can, as I say, continue to turn the screw on sanctions. It can authorise the UN to redouble efforts. It can use incentives such as later economic development to get communities to come to the table. So I don't myself see that side of it as something particularly damaging to the UN. It is in the nature, sadly, of political processes, and if we didn't have the UN, I don't think there would be a more effective body that could do that. Where I think you have a point is when the Security Council is blocked and cannot take a decision, as very sadly it has been for far too long on Syria.
Sorry, yes. On Syria, Staffan de Mistura is trying to establish a constitutional committee to write the Syrian constitution, but he's blocked by the Syrian government refusal to take part, and we reached a dead end. Where do we go from here to give hope? What can you say to the people in Syria who are watching, millions of people watching this interview, to give them some hope that we are trying to find a political solution for the problem if the government of Syria is blocking the first step on that road?
I think the first thing to say is that this is a conflict that has gone on far too long, and the international community collectively should probably have stepped in earlier, but the overwhelming responsibility belongs to the Assad regime, and the two countries in particular who have supported and are still supporting that regime. One is obviously Russia and the other is Iran. Russia and Iran need to redouble their efforts to bring the Assad government to follow Security Council resolutions and to work with Staffan de Mistura, as you say, to get the Constitutional Committee going. We will redouble our efforts to persuade the Russians to put pressure on the Assad regime. I think one of the enduring mysteries of the Syrian conflict is why the Russians do not use their influence to enable the Security Council's wishes, indeed the international community's wishes, to be executed.
All right. I would like to ask you here on 2401, do you still have hope that it will be implemented? There hasn't been any implementation or compliance by Russia, by Syria, by their allies and militias, the Iranian Hezbollah, with this resolution. Do you still have hope that it will be implemented?
I think one has to have hope. It is the process, the Geneva process. We need to get together as the P5 initially and with the wider UN community, with Staffan de Mistura and the Secretary General, to map out a way back to Geneva in a way that will be lasting and enduring. And I know that's difficult, and I know it's been said before, but it does remain the only way forward.
Yeah. You talked about Iran's smuggling of arms, and the world is watching now. But how concerned are you, or your government, on the Iran meddling roles in neighboring countries, whether it's Iraq's election, whether it's Syria's wars, and in Yemen?
Perhaps before I answer that, I could just say one more thing about the Assad regime.
Yes.
The other element in all this, I think, is accountability. The arc of justice is long, as we all know, but accountability remains a very crucial part of this. And one of the things the UN can and does do is keep the evidence against the day when people can be held accountable.
That was my next question, but let's go back.
Okay, sorry about that.
You stole
but
it.
It's important. It's an important point.
It's very important.
On Iran, this is a difficult question because there are many people in your region who believe in a very good and bad view of the world, a dichotomy.
Yes, yes.
For our part, we would like to see an Iran that has its rightful place in the region and that plays a constructive role. We do accept that Iran has legitimate security interests, but we agree with many people in Riyadh, for example, who believe that Iran is using its influence in a malign and dangerous way in the Middle East. You mentioned some of the countries where Iran is active, and we will need to contest that influence if we are to have security and stability throughout the Middle East.
This week marks 1 year since the attack on Khan Sheikhoun with chemical weapon, the sarin gas, on the 4th of March of last year. Also, your country was the victim of an attack on its soil this year on March the 4th. Why do you believe the future holds for the concept of accountability for any chemical weapon? Because it hasn't been encouraging what's happening in Syria and the accountability there.
I think one of the shocking things for me coming back into the UN, and which is a change over 10 years ago, is the extent to which people appear to be viewing, not with complacency perhaps, but with tolerance, the use of WMD-like chemical weapons. I think even as recently as 10 years ago, the use of WMD in the modern era would have been totally abhorrent to the vast majority of UN member states. And if we are not careful, we risk giving the impression that these are weapons like any other, whereas of course they are in a category wholly of their own. And the Security Council debated this yesterday when we talked about Salisbury, and the day before when we talked about Syria and the Chemical Weapons Convention. So it's a really important question, but the answer remains that accountability is accountability. There's no special court for use of WMD. We would like to see a referral to the International Criminal Court. That is blocked by a couple of countries on the Security Council, but we will keep trying for that. The Dutch issued a very strong call in the debate for referral, and we supported them, as did France. We will keep trying, but in the meantime, we will support the various instruments of the UN, like the Human Rights Council, in collecting the evidence that one day will be used for accountability.
The President of the United States, President Trump, has suggested that, or showed interest in pulling US forces from Syria after 6 months. How does the UK government view any withdrawal of Western forces? I mean, it's only 2,000 American soldiers there. Isn't that really empowers Russia and Iran in Syria?
Well, we think that really good progress has been made by the Americans, by us, by the French, by the coalition in the fight against Daesh, against ISIS.
But it's not completely...
You're absolutely right about that. It isn't. But progress has been made, and we need to recognise that. The task is to finish the job and ensure that we have an enduring defeat of ISIS rather than a temporary one. So we keep our contribution and the work of the coalition under review. We will keep in very close touch with Washington and other capitals about how best to execute that.
21 serious issues are still unaddressed, as you said in your speech in the Security Council, after 4 years in the original declaration of Syria when they joined in 2013, the OPCW. And still, the two facilities of producing chemical weapons are not destroyed. What can we do to ensure the full destruction of these facilities and ensure that Syria does not possess chemical weapons?
I think it's very important, particularly at the current time, that the international community, which means each member state of the Security Council, gives its unqualified support to those bits of the international system like the Chemical Weapons Convention and the states that are part of OPCW and the Executive Council, so that they can carry out their work and so people can be brought to account. Now, that obviously includes a mechanism to investigate who is responsible, and very unfortunately the Russians have to date blocked that mechanism, which is called the JIM, Joint Investigative Mechanism. One of the things we drew attention to yesterday in the debate on the use of chemical weapons in Salisbury, an English city, was the fact that it is grotesque that the Russians call for an investigation into Salisbury while blocking an investigation into who is responsible in Syria.
As time's caught up with us, I'd like to give you the opportunity if you'd like to address any subject that I omitted to mention.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. Just to say, it's a huge honour to be invited onto your show. Very grateful to you for doing that. I think it's part of showing that Britain is really engaged in the world. As we leave the EU, the UN will be a more active stage for British foreign policy and engagement. And I just want to say that I personally, being here, look forward to engaging with as many member states as possible on a whole range of issues. Whether they agree with us or they don't agree with us, the important thing is to find common ways of addressing the challenges we face in such an uncertain world.
Ambassador Karen Pierce, a pioneer, we thank you and we wish you the very, very best of luck in your task.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Very good to see you again.
Thank you, ma'am.